Okay. So we're in the end game now. A couple more classes left, and that's it. I've got a group of men that I'm coordinating with to talk about future topics and lay out a schedule for us for Sunday morning. If you've got a topic, please give it to me so I can put it on the list when I talk with them. And we'll figure out who's teaching what over the next several weeks. But we've got at least 2 weeks left, this one and another, because nobody yet has ever come forward and said that they're ready to take the test and recite their memory verse. So the class will continue. All right. So this class, which is scheduled for at least 2 sessions, potentially 3, depending how we throw together our discussion, is on blame. You ever been blamed? You ever been wrongfully blamed? I should say the other one first. You ever been rightfully blamed? You did it, and you did it. And that's okay, right? Everyone can handle that. I'm responsible for my actions. I broke the cup. It's me. I did it. I don't know why I walked away from it, but I did. Not that that's ever happened. It's not a real life experience. So we're going to talk about blame. We're going to talk about it in 2 categories, potentially 3, depending upon our discussion today. We'll walk through one of them this week, one of them next week, and then we'll see how it goes. I blame you for being late, because that's the topic for today. Okay, so keep ourselves in context. Today we're going to talk about blaming God. Next week we'll talk about that too, but in a different way. Today you're going to get to talk about someone else. Next week we're going to talk about you. We'll see how that works for y'all. So keep the topic narrow. It's not about blame in general. That's the third topic if we need to get there. If we want to talk about blame in the third person so that we don't feel like it's personal. Because there are things that go on inside of us when we blame others for our actions. Consequences meets actions is painful. Not only for the person it's happening to, but to everyone all around, if they're not mature about it. So, what do you think are the 2 types of people who blame God? First pop quiz. I didn't think it was going to be a class stumper, so.
No, I had a cousin that went to my grandma's house where he lived on my dad's side, and they had a fire at the house. And this is when I was younger, but I still remember to this day. There was a pet, there was a dog that ended up dying in the fire. He was mad at God because he allowed the.
Right. So, see if I can get the relationships right first. Fathers.
It was my cousin.
All right, cousin burns down a home. The family pet's inside, pet dies. He blamed God. Well done.
And my cousin was the type that's to go to answer your actual question. They didn't attend church very often, so they acknowledged or he believed there was God, but he didn't have a good relationship.
All right, you're very close. You are very close, sir. Did you have your hand up, Elizabeth?
Well, I was thinking the first blaming God was Eve and Adam and said, we sinned because you made me this woman.
That was more deflection. And then he was trying to reverse the roles. And so it's a classic blame technique.
Started out at the beginning.
Yes, and so you've actually spoken about the exact 2 types of people who blame God. Okay, so I think that the first one is people who don't believe in God, but when they need a target, find one in Him. Sir?
I would probably make a remark like intentionally ignorant. They're ignorant of who God really is. And they don't want to face up to the issues that they've got, so therefore they got to blame somebody. You blame something.
Right.
We don't see God directly. We see Him as a
Sky God, yeah. Special face in the sky. So what Gail said was one of those people I'll paraphrase. You ever seen a kid actually say the devil made me do it? He has no idea who the devil is or what he's about. It's just as easy to say God did that to me because I don't have a relationship with him. I don't understand who he is. He doesn't mean anything to me, so he's this thing out there I can blame freely because it costs me nothing. Yeah. Yeah. All my problems are so simple because they're someone else's fault. It makes... I didn't see me do it. I love it. So I think that people who don't believe in God blame God. And I think that believers sometimes can blame God. That should cover everyone, right? All people are one of those two categories. Right? We have believers and non-believers. Each of them, in turn, possess the ability to blame God for their problems.
So, do you think that people generally who blame God are trying to justify their disbelief and their lack of relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question that I'm not prepared to answer. So the question was, do you think that people who blame God, who don't believe in God, are trying to justify their behavior and actions? Is that close enough?
Right. So you don't have to believe in a God who would do something like that. That's a justification.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that kind of person a little bit, and you're already steering the conversation there, so I think that's fine. Sir?
I tend to agree with, mostly agree with what Elizabeth's suggesting here. I would take out the word trying to justify, or rephrase it just a little bit. Basically, that's the reason for not
Yeah.
believing in God.
Yeah, I would stand on it. Yeah.
That it's an attempt at rationalization.
Some behaviors we don't have to mitigate for others. We don't have to mitigate away a murder with a bunch of different types of words that take away a little bit of the responsibility. I'm willing to ask people to bear the burden of responsibility for their beliefs, whether they're a believer in Christ or someone else. And so if you want to blame God because you're deflecting, I'm willing to say you're blaming God because you're deflecting. It's not often a conversation that goes well. We're going to talk about that because remember the context of the conversation. We're talking about people who haven't yet come to God. And how do we talk to them about God? Some of them that you meet will be blaming God and be using that as a full-length body shield, like an ancient Athenian, against having a relationship with him. That's what we're trying to talk about and get through. How do you get them to drop the shield? Yeah.
I'm going to put it on somebody else. Always have a tendency sometimes to say, well, if it hadn't been for if we don't want to take responsibility. We don't want to be the ones that say, yeah, I did it, I broke the contract, whatever. And so we want to put the blame somewhere else. We want to put that responsibility. A lot of times we try to put it on God.
Yeah, nobody wants to be responsible for all the train wrecks in their life. But you should. You own all the switches and flips to control the track, I guarantee it. So I think that's something that's important that we discuss with our children as we raise them. And probably an honest, in the mirror conversation with ourselves. Am I a morally responsible individual? And do I accept responsibility for my actions? That's a great conversation to have with yourself. First time you have it, please don't invite anyone. Maybe the second or third time when you've identified some areas where you did not perform so well and you're willing to discuss them, invite someone. So in general, we'll talk about two types of people. Today we're just going to talk about the first one because that's the whole purpose of this discussion. We'll close out the entire series with the discussion about ourselves and our relationship with God and why we sometimes lose our way and blame Him. Can I blame God for Christ? See, well, for me, that's an easy question to answer because the answer is there's no blame attached to God for Christ's willingness to complete his mission. Yeah. But he was free to deviate. He was free to not do it. I mean, it's a great conversation. At any time, Christ could have come off the cross. What then? Oh, man, that's a horrible thought. So no blame to God for his son, part of himself's willingness to accomplish the purpose. Are you to blame for a team that loses if you're running a 4:40 of a mile race and your 4:40 is in fact the fastest? No. I would go see my 3 teammates. Gentlemen, you need to get faster. So, public service announcement, that's what PSA. As we have this discussion, I thought it important that we frame it with these 2 statements. So, 1, have you ever met someone who blames God and tried to talk to them? Yeah, it's tough. This is not a one-and-done conversation. Don't start it if you can't give them the commitment time to finish it long term. It's only fair. If you try to rush it, you're going to misrepresent God. If you try to force it, you're going to make someone angry. This is a conversation of dawning realizations on another. You've got to walk them through this, but they've got to accept the thoughts. You ever gave someone a thought and waited for them to think of it? It's hilarious. It is. And so this is part of that. You're just sharing information, you're having a discussion, and then you allow them time to think, because what you're asking them to give away is an emotional attachment to a concept that's toxic. And things can be hard to let go, especially when we're hurting. And that's the second one. Hurt people hurt people. Be very careful with this conversation, because more often than not, there is some grief attached to this position, or at least pain. And if you touch people's pain, sometimes they say ouch and then lash out. So you got to be very careful with it. But I'm sure there are plenty of cases in point when it comes to this. And I'm going to give you a whole letter in the Bible to look at before you attempt this, for how you should frame your thoughts. Not a lot of scripture and verses for how to have this conversation for you, where you get a checklist of verses. Oh, I said all those, why haven't you changed your mind? You ever met that checklist personality who wants you to totally leave one position for a new one, and they've worked through their checklist and you remain unconvinced? Oh, it's hilarious. There's a lot of mental anxiety going on there on their part. So remember this as we frame our discussion. So the first question might be, why are you blaming God? You don't even believe in him. Why is it his fault? Fun on our side. I'm not sure it's productive on theirs, because it's not really their purpose or intent. I don't know that type of person is necessarily blaming God so much as they're not accepting the outcome of an action.
Well, again, I'll go back to what I said before. Basically, I can't, so from that person's point of view, I can't accept that there is a God who would fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Okay? Basically, I think that's the main position. There may be, I don't know, I'm assuming there's not too much cognitive dissonance.
Right. I think...
Too big an assumption on my part.
No, maybe not. I think you're correct in a lot of the situations in which there has not been intense physical pain. And pain comes in a lot of ways in that discussion. I think someone who is suffering the loss of a loved one and blaming God is not inside the scope of what you said. But that number is few. Most people who blame God for generalities don't care one way or another. They're just firing off a one-off.
And maybe it comes down to what we mean by believe in. Okay? I think there are certainly some people who accept that there is a God and blame God for something, and because they blame God, they cannot follow God. Now so it's different from saying, I don't believe
Right.
It's saying, I don't believe in God, I don't follow.
I'll paraphrase that. So if it's a little g God in your life, in a general sense, he's not your God. You're certainly not going to follow him. He's not the God. He's not God in the sense that we understand God. Then I do believe it's very easy to blame him for your consequences. So, Fred.
In a sense, and this kind of follows up on both of your comments, I've heard more than once, no God but mine would have.
I hadn't even considered that when I was doing this.
I think what they're doing is saying, so it's your God who let this happen, and they're kind of blaming you.
So we're going to get there. Thank you. That's a great point. It might be the next one up. So what Fred said was, have you ever heard someone say, no God of mine would do that? Or words to that effect? And so, yes, some of them, while using God as the target verbally, really have a different one. And we're going to talk about that this morning. So, first, understand that if they profess disbelief in God, this is not a faith issue. You can't talk them off the ledge, probably, with verses from the Bible. From certain areas. I'm always a fan of Proverbs. I'm always a fan of Psalms, just because I think that there is good general wisdom in there for all of us. But you're probably not going to convince someone with the material they don't believe in about this action. Because for this case, it's a heart issue, not a faith issue. I think that the Lord's asking you first to touch their heart. Open that door and you can have discussions about God in general and who He is and their pain. But you can't use Scripture as a battering ram. It's unfortunate that it answers every problem I have because I accept it and I believe in it. It doesn't answer every problem someone else has if they're busy fighting the words and don't understand the concept. Hans.
So, you can actually use Scripture not as a battering ram, and maybe you apply it to yourself in a discussion of how you have witnessed what God has done, and can use the Scripture to show them that usually calms the moment down, if you will. And I can say this because especially my friend that I lost, my last conversation with him was, look, I understand that you're agnostic, but as a Christian, this is where I find strength in my faith in Christ.
I like that. I was more combative. And so I'm locked in my head when I make these slides. But I think you're right. What Hans said was, you can use that if you are the example, and you do it with a little bit of art in your science. Because I'm applying the Scriptures I believe into myself as an example to them in a discussion. People don't often get upset by that. So I think it's good.
He understood that I could say that because of our loss of Tyler.
Yeah.
So he's known me that long. So I was able to say this during that period of time without even having to reference it,
Right.
is what God has done for me.
And connection is important. So he's referencing his relationship to someone else. Always helpful if you're a known Christian and they know you, sir.
I think in most cases, the barriers to faith are emotional, not intellectual.
Right.
The intellectual arguments that people will bring up are smokescreens or something that's much deeper, and it's emotional. And if we focus on intellectual arguments for faith, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there's no value in that, but I think to a large extent we're wasting our time because we need to get to the real barriers,
Right.
which are in fact emotional.
I agree. So what Rod is saying is that, understand the construct of people and the discussion we're trying to have. Trying to have an intellectual discussion with people about Scripture doesn't touch their emotional need, which is really the hole in their heart that they're trying to fill. And I agree with that 100%. I don't argue math with flat earthers. No use. They've invented their own, and they're not going to listen to mine. I just hand them a map and say, here's Magellan's voyage. Argue with him. He's been dead 300 years. Good luck with that. And then I walk away. but I'm also not trying to help them through their problem with that answer. And we're going to get to this. At all times, remember that this discussion is probably a heart issue. And we need to be in that area of our heart and our expertise when we talk about it with people. So, somebody said this earlier, but I said it this way. Either pain will always find a target. In the Army, I always say that blame will always find a home. Because it's the one thing that always, solution. Blame will always find a home. Know which one of the two things you are. Sometimes people who are blaming God want a target, and the target isn't really God. Sometimes the target is any Christian that wanders into their sight.
I think sometimes too, they're trying to put God in a box. It's like, this is how God should be. This is how I need to have him. When it doesn't fit that, yeah, then they're going to look for, well, why doesn't he fit? Oh, it's your fault because it's your God, not mine. So still, they're trying to put him in that box. And it's like,
A lot of people don't want God to be God. A lot of people want God to be what they want God to be. Put yourself in that position, not intellectually with that as an exercise, but have you ever been in a relationship where someone didn't want you to be you? Wanted you to be someone else? Only didn't tell you what that someone else was? Or something else? How weird does that sound? It happens. And it happens in this situation, and it happens in people's relationships. So we're going to talk a little bit about the first person's pain, and then we're going to close out today's discussion with what happens when you have that dawning realization that, in fact, you were the target and someone just wanted to take out some of their anger, frustration, and pain on you because you've self-identified as a Christian. The answer is really easy. It's one I have a problem with. So, if you can identify the purpose, reason, and why, and I don't mean down to the exact moment and detail of their life, but if you can at least identify that what we're really talking about is pain masquerading as anger, which often enough it is, then maybe you can help. We're not trained mental health professionals, but we are Christians. We can help. Hans just said that Ray Fuller lives on a ledge, and how horrible of you to identify it and be correct. So, that's right. All of us live on our own ledges.
But that's it. There are opportunities every day where somebody is literally on a fence, especially if they're not a believer.
I just had a mental image of everyone walking around a building with about a sidewalk-sized ledge on it. We're all on the ledge, and you're walking past people. Imagine the difference in mentalities for people who walk on the edge side and the people who walk on the building side. And so, Hans just said, I'm dancing on the edge. And I might be every day. So how do you help? You're a Christian. You should know the answer to this question. So, how about that? I always offer up prayer as a first line of defense for all things. The Bible spends so much time on prayer. And I don't have to pray with them if that's not their willingness. I can pray for them. I can pray about them. But I think prayer is real. I think prayer works. I pray for you all. The elders pray. We spend the first 30 minutes to an hour of every meeting we have praying for people. And I pray for people often throughout my duty day. Whenever a message comes out, I stop. I take a knee, and I will give someone at least 30 seconds of prayer. You're worth at least that to me. And then I pray for myself every day. But I think prayer is powerful and it's important, and we need to exercise it to build our relationship with God.
It helps if the person that you're praying for tells you what they want you to pray for. Because then that actually is one more step that brings them in or you to them. And so getting them to, maybe not in full detail, but
Yeah, that might be a great first step for them to at least be able to give away something to ask what you pray for. I've broken a lot of ice in relationships with people asking them if I can pray for them. Especially if we're at work, where frankly, pray for me. Sometimes I'm not the best example when you're coming at me every 8 minutes with a new crisis. But I've asked people, can I pray for you about that? Yes. Is there anything specifically, exactly what you said? And sometimes they say, no, just enough prayer is wonderful, and they're willing to accept that. Sometimes, yes, pray about this. And our relationship from that moment on is slightly different because they've given me the right to pray about them, which is important in a person's life. Sir? Right. Yeah, it's a certain character of heart. Allowing yourself to be honest with people about where they're at, especially if they're dying. Someone who has terminal cancer knows they have terminal cancer. Dancing around it is unhelpful. I love you, forgive me, I forgive you, goodbye, in whatever way is working for them. Yeah, because it's a tough discussion, facing death.
Because we all face death, and there are some people who are forced to face their own death.
Right. So let me paraphrase the conversation, though, with Fred for our studio audience, which I'm sure is millions by now, right? Fred says that there's an art to this science of being able to approach people and to use our Christianity in a way that's helpful to them in their moment of pain. And learning how to acknowledge other people's pain, respect it, and allow them to share it with you, which is them controlling the conversation, is an art. Most Americans just want to bull through. If I can fix something with surgery, I'm not really interested in trying any other method, right? Cut it out, get it out of there, let's go. And we can't do that as Christians because people are whole. And they're going to want to be healed the way they want to be healed. If, I'll add this one caveat that Fred did not, if they want to be healed. And so it's important that we be Christian. We're going to get to that. That's coming up real close. I think the Bible gives pretty clear guidance on how to do that in one specific letter.
I'm going to say that sometimes we don't even need to say it. Just be there for that person.
That's tough for me.
That'll speak more
Yeah.
volumes.
Yeah. That's right. Have you ever comforted somebody with just your presence? Yeah, no. Can you imagine me sitting down and shutting up? No. I'm not your huckleberry for that one. But yes, I've seen that be incredibly helpful where people just sit with someone. That's what service animals do. Be a service animal. Be a good one. Sit, provide love and comfort. Right? That's what we're talking about? Fred, Bonnie? Learning the art of comforting others? It is an art, Hans.
My mother, a few years back, she has had several roommates die there. She lives, and one specific, she mentioned that she knew she was dying, and so she was able to get her hand through the curtain and hold her hand. And that's all she did. She didn't
Yes.
she just held her hand.
Right, yes. And so, one caveat in this discussion, we're talking about the big event. sometimes this is not about that big event. I've had people be angry at God for their incarceration. And dude, I was there, man. We did this. What are you whining about being in jail for? It certainly isn't God's fault. I really remember you picking the lock, not the Spirit. It's not always the big ones, but it is important that we acknowledge the whole scope and scale of the discussion. Sir? What? Why are you laughing at me? No, so I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Before we can comfort or pray for them, first we have to acknowledge that there's something off, so we can actually ask them and get involved in that conversation to get yourself in a situation where you can ask
Yeah.
them.
I agree. What he said was, first we have to learn to tune our senses to be able to find these people. Find is a bad word. We're not hunting for them. But when you encounter them, you should know it. I will say this, though. It'll sound like I'm counter-arguing, but I'm not. But I have never met anyone that didn't believe in God, that knew I was a Christian, that didn't feel compelled to let me know they didn't believe. It's like, how do you know you met a vegetarian? Well, just wait 5 minutes. They'll tell you. You know, it's a joke, but some things in people's lives they can't help but profess. And if not being a Christian defines them in my presence, they'll say it. It's like I trigger them. It's like, I got to let you know I'm not a Christian. I'm like, okay, thanks for sharing. Can I pray for you? Here it is. Be a 1 John Christian. If you haven't read it lately, go home and read it. That letter mentions love so many times, and it mentions comforting, and it mentions being there for people and how to console a soul. And that's really what it is. It's John, right? Just pouring it out for you. This is how I work. And so make sure that that's how you work so that we can get it taken care of. Sorry about that. Significant emotional event on post last night. Follow-on conversations. It will wait because we're talking about something more important. And then later on when you see me and I'm missing parts of my anatomy, just know that some conversations come at a price if you avoid them. But this is more important. So read 1 John. If you haven't been in touch with your heart lately, he will put you there. And he talks about, and it implies in every conversation, it applies in every conversation we can have, especially with people in pain.
I think what you just said prior to your last sentence is exactly right. What you were talking about, what you're dealing with on post. We tend to not want to have the conversation when we are given the opportunity to have it. And yes, it does have consequences, and spiritually.
Wow, yeah. So what Hans just said, and I didn't discuss this here in the slides, but we'll run down this rabbit hole because it's important. Don't you run away from this conversation, Christian. You can take time to enter it correctly. But if someone comes to you and they've got this kind of issue in their life, I would hope that as a Christian you would claim God, not in a combative way, in exactly the way we've talked about, so that they understand who and where you are. And be there for them, work. I don't want to say work with them. We're not mental health care professionals. I am nobody's therapist. We are all everybody's therapist. If you can understand the capital T and the little t in that statement, you can run for help, but that's the only running that I think you should be doing. We're supposed to take care of people and each other.
I think we also need to be open because it may bring up our own pain that we experience. And that might be something that we can share that with and say, hey, I've been there.
Yeah.
I had the same pain, but we have to be able to acknowledge it again. We may still have that pain.
Yeah. Wade makes a great point. You have all the tools you need. That's what you're saying. I will not say that there is pain in your life so that you can gain experience at it, so that you can share understanding of it with others. But maybe Maybe that is why we have pain. I won't say it's the reason, because who am I to know the mind of God, right? But I know that I've been able to use a lot of my pain to help others. Once I accepted it, I gave it to God, and then He held it and didn't give it back. It was wonderful. He's sort of greedy with my pain that way, and I love Him for it. So, what is it not? Have you ever seen people who only want to beat people over the head with the Lord? Oh, it's horrible. I pray for them. So if someone is willing to talk about their belief and why not, and it is getting toward that discussion about their pain, it's not time for actions meets consequences. Now, that's 180 degrees from what I just said I would do to my buddy in jail, right? That dude wasn't looking for the Lord. He was scapegoating. And so I had no sympathy for him at the time. It was like, God doesn't get blamed for your 6 months, dude. You earned it. Own it. It goes on your resume. You know, for your plus 5 points in street cred. But don't use it as an opportunity to judge and turn people away from the Lord. Please fail to do that. The next two are questions. Somewhere in there, is it an opportunity to have a free will discussion? That's really the discussion I and my friend were having as we push brooms, because that was how we earned our $1.50 a week. This is on you, man. You did this. In fact, you're the reason I'm here if we want to start sharing blame. So, I think it's okay to have these discussions somewhere in it. I think part of healing for any pain in your life is accepting your burden of responsibility for it, right? Or accepting that there is no burden of responsibility for anyone. I know people who have lost loved ones and have turned against God for it, and that's the discussion ultimately that they have to come up with themselves. Life happens. Sir? Yes. So you're right. This is not part of the heart. Thank you for that clarification. And so, because I think the conversation is going to go all over the place at some point. And if you get them through the heart discussion, they're going to look for rationalizations and acceptance.
You have to address the emotional issue.
Yes.
Before this is ever going to make any kind of impact.
Yes, and that's a great point. So don't come at this first. Remember how we're working the discussion. If you don't help someone's heart, you're probably not helping them. Help the heart first, and then they'll probably have this discussion with you afterwards. So these are the discussions not to have up front. There is never a time to say all things pass. Hate that term. I don't know who brought it up, but it's horrible. Have you ever really been in pain and had someone just come up and dismiss it? You'll get over it. Lose a pet that you love and let somebody tell you within the first 48 hours that it'll pass. You might turn into an animal. Lose a loved one abruptly without any, preparation and planning, and have someone callously tell you that your pain will pass. Nobody ever needs to hear that. It is true that it does, but it doesn't for all people 100% of the time on the same path. And it doesn't help. It doesn't get them through anything. Certainly doesn't help them address, understand, acknowledge, process, and lay aside whatever grief they're carrying.
Again, this is the time when you can usually express to them that you carry your cross, you bear your cross, and these things that occur in our lives are terrible, part of it. And that usually helps them understand, and again, puts it on your own self about what God has given you the capacity to handle.
That's a great point, and I apologize that I didn't put it on here. So what Hans said was, there is an opportunity here for you to tell them what your pain is and share it. I don't want to say was, because it doesn't pass. There are losses in my life that every time I think about, I miss that person. but I've dealt with it and am dealing with it and moving, accepting, acknowledging that being the last one standing, I've got to keep going. It's a poor way to say it, but you're absolutely right. So there is an opportunity always to share your understanding of your own pain in a way to help others process theirs. But don't make it about you. This is not a chance to look at someone else's problem and go, this isn't about me, but how can I make this about me? Last part. Remember I said we'd talk about what happens if you're the target? What do? Yeah, you can love them anyway. I didn't put that in there either. I apologize. I should have. What I said was get out of that situation. That was profound. There are times where you should just pack your stuff up and go. And if you can't help, acknowledge that. If someone walks up to me, or if I walk up to someone and their hood is open and they're like, I got a car problem, I can stare at the engine with them. They're like, that's an engine. I know that much. And then I got to walk away because I have left my skill set. I have no expertise. Unless it's a 1966 Ford Mustang with a 489 small block. And then I'm getting after it. I'm like, get out of here. We're going to do this. Only car I've ever worked on. It's the only car I trust myself to work on. Other than that, I'm just going to stare at your engine and commiserate with you, but we're not going to get anywhere. So know when you cannot help and go, especially if you are the target. You'll know you're the target. You will know you're the target. Have you ever been the target? Anyone in here ever been the target for their Christianity? Yeah. Most of us feel like we have at some point in our life. I don't know that I've ever really been confronted directly, angrily about my being a Christian. I've been the opposite of that. I've stood at an airport with a God Answers Prayers hat and had women congregate around me in a non-seating area because they felt safe. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. I didn't realize it. My boss pointed it out to me. He's like, do you see what's going on here? And I looked around, and I'm standing there, and he and I are the only males in a group that is formed of about 12 women waiting for an airplane. And they were chatting us up. And they weren't together. They were all strangers to each other. And the only difference between us and every other man standing around there was that I was wearing a God Answers Prayers cap. So I had the opposite happen to me. It was wonderful. It really confused my boss.
So in this statement, there are times, now this is where I believe the devil is behind all that is bad, and that we are allowed to be tested. But I have been targeted by angry, awful, terrible things that they did not know that I was a Christian. And so that feeling alone is that that's a different engagement, if I may say.
Yeah.
Because they don't know that you're a Christian, and yet there is something behind their eyes where.
Have you ever met crazy? Or rage? Or anger? Just met it on the street randomly? Live in a big enough city, and you will, out of rats in a cage. I've seen it, but like I said, I tend to have enough street smarts to where I can sense it coming, and I just duck away.
Well, sometimes it just comes.
Hans is like, I just wandered into it. So be careful. If you are the target, you are allowed to disengage. This is not you failing to defend or claim the Lord. This is you choosing not to make the situation worse. We can do that. We're allowed to do that. Okay, next week we're going to talk about you and the things you have blamed God for in your life, or that we could if we're not careful, or how we avoid that, because that's where I hope most of our experience lies in, how we've accepted it and just accepted it in a healthy way and are moving on with our faith and not putting aside the Lord. And there are verses that we can use internally for ourselves and for our community. As we face life's problems, you will. I've lost so many people in the last 5 years. It just hit me. I'm like, wow, we're all that age. And some were very easy because they were a Christian, they were strong, they were faithful, and they faced death without fear. And I have lost friends who had no relationship with God. It's different. So we'll talk about those next week. And then hopefully after that, I'll have met with the men I've asked to help me come up with some lessons for the next several time periods, and I'll announce those and we'll go from there. If you have one, an idea or a concept or a thought for a series or a one-off class that you want to hear, get with me. We'll put it on the list. With that, I think we're complete, and thank you for your time.